Hello everybody, welcome back to Tales of Adventure Agents of Boo. As you can see, this is kind of what my real life form looks like. For those of you who don't know, hello, I am your sadistic maniac, your hostess with the mostest, and the dungeon master to Tales of Adventure Agents of Boo, Dapper Wombat. Now, I know we uploaded a post on Instagram a little bit earlier, and we've actually had a couple of people interested with the new book that came out, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. And so I thought it would be kind of a fun little thing to do, to essentially kind of have a series of videos that I do, maybe about a couple minutes long, to kind of give my different takes and to basically give like an overview, a breakdown of the different chapters. So there's only 4 in total, and even within those, kind of giving a similar breakdown. This is going to be a lot more off the top of my head and a little bit more unscripted, but essentially I'll be covering all 4 chapters. What I liked about the book, what I didn't like about the book, what I changed, what I wouldn't change, and so on and so forth. So first off and foremost, and I guess kind of doing a final review of whether or not you should rent the book, buy the book, and so on and so forth. So, first thing I like to do is an overview. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything is essentially like a book that has a lot of new rule options that would be not only available for your players, but also from your DMing standpoint. Basically, the whole name of the game is giving people options. So there are different really interesting things like with optional class abilities, there's specialty things that your parties can do, as well as a host of different magical items, spells, and a really couple of cool, neat things that the Dungeon Master can use as effective tools. Overall, I would say that this book is actually really awesome for a couple of reasons. One, I would say that this book really gives a lot of inspiration, especially for people who are really big into homebrewing their own, essentially like their own stuff. While it doesn't give any specific rules for homebrewing, it definitely has a lot of potential for ideas. Like for me in general, just kind of looking at some of this stuff and what I can do personally to homebrew and kind of like make a couple of these things a little bit better. But like I said, I'll be going through each chapter individually as like a series of their own videos, starting with the chapter 1. For a lot of these, because it gets into like the breakdown of the different classes, I'm really only going to be focusing on talking about the optional class features and what that can add versus the new actual subclasses that the Cauldron of Everything adds on. Though if you all would like me to do a take on those and actually have me go through and review those, I honestly don't mind. You just have to let us know in the comments down below. These are also going to be on YouTube, and you can always follow along at Tales of Adventure on our YouTube, Instagram, our Twitter, as well as our Facebook. So first and foremost, I think we're going to dive in with the first part, and kind of the first part about this book that I don't like. I want to say that overall, like I said, I really enjoyed this book and I had a lot of fun reading through it. In getting into it, this is just kind of one of the first parts that I really didn't like and what I would want to change. So, getting to it, the first chapter is about character options, and as such, the first paragraph for character options is customizing your origin. Now, I know Dungeons & Dragons has had a very big, well, I wouldn't say very big, but very persistent theme with a couple of their different monsters, that you had races that were just purely evil for the sake of being evil. The two that most famously come to mind that people think of are the orcs, who are basically big, dumb, strong, and evil, and just love fighting a bunch and raiding villages, and drow. That drow are sadistic, live in the dark, have really dark skin, and are always trying to feed victims to their spider queen god. And I know, especially as the years have kind of evolved and with everything going on, that Wizards of the Coast has been trying to do a little bit more to kind of give those options where it's like those players aren't stuck to it. Like, just because you play an orc doesn't mean necessarily that you would play automatically a martial type character, in the same vein of like, just because you play a gnome doesn't necessarily mean that you be stuck in playing sort of like a wizard type of campaign. So mechanically, I understand why they did this like this, because the Customize Your Origins is only about 1 page long. Essentially, what the Customize Origins does is not only are you able to just kind of swap your ability scores at starting where you want them to be, but essentially also you can swap out your languages, as well as you can swap out like your proficiencies if you get proficiencies with armor, weapons, tools, and other things like that. And it also kind of gives on a little bit of changing your subclass, but I'll get into that a little bit. The reason why I don't like the character options here for the Customizing Origin, again, mechanically, I understand why it makes a lot of sense as to why somebody would do that, because it's easier to just kind of do it this way versus trying to reinvent a whole new system for it. But at least to me, I feel as though this is just kind of a little bit half-assed, I guess. I don't know, to me it just seems a little cheap, where it's just like, oh, well, instead of doing the things that you were worried about, you can just take those things and just move them somewhere else. And it's not necessarily the fact of like, yeah, that can just happen. I feel as though, I think I would have loved to see a little bit more like flavor that came with it. Instead of just being, no, you can just swap your languages, swap your ability scores, and just basically say, hey, you can just put them wherever. So it's like, you don't have to have an orc that's, dumb. You can have an orc that's super intelligent. They can put in, like, the last point they have in charisma. And, that's kind of like the solution to it. And it's just kind of like, as much as there was a whole big thing about reworking a lot of like the negative racial stereotypes in Dungeons and Dragons, and having these negative caricatures of real life depictions of different cultures, this just kind of seems like a half measure almost. Again, mechanically, I understand why this is the way it is, because this is a very simple and clean system. For me, I think personally I would have done it where it was something, at least how my general philosophy is that a character is always, a character is always defined, a person, a creature, is always defined by the environment they live in and the culture that they grew up with. And I think I would have loved to see like the environment that they grew up in basically kind of maybe has more of a little bit more of a flavor of like, these are where your physical stats come from, and the culture is more of kind of like where your mindset and your thinking, where you get a little bit more of like your mental stats. So like, I remember I was reading a homebrew somewhere, and it was talking about like, I think it was a variant for humans, but of like the different like humans living in the tundra, the Arctic, the jungles, the forests, the savannah, and they gave like different bonuses to that. And they also had an option of like, oh, well, they also lived in like a magocracy, a theocracy, a democracy, and having those different options for those. And I think I would have really loved to see something like that here. Again, it just seems like for the character options and just kind of customizing your origin, they really had a potential to kind of do some really cool stuff with it. And this just really feels like a half-assed performative attempt. Again, I do understand the mechanics and how this system works because it's very simple. I just personally would have loved to have seen something more from this, because as a book that is boasting about giving players and DMs more options, this really doesn't kind of add anything new or interesting to to it. So I was definitely a little bit disappointed, or I was very disappointed with the customizing your origins tract. I'd still definitely say that you should get the book and test it out for yourself, but I'd say for this part in particular, I was hoping to get a little bit more. And maybe I might do a little bit of a homebrew for that later. The other thing I want to get into before I get done with this first video is that I really liked the idea of players being able to change their subclasses and the varying rules that they have on the back page for that. And I really like that idea because I know some players feel as though if they pick a subclass that's like that, they can get really stuck into that, and it's like, oh, well, there's no way for me to change that. And now this gives them that option to. I think you can only really do it one time, but it's basically either you can train to do it, to change your subclass as you're like honing your skills from one thing to the next, or as a sudden change, as a theatrical or a narrative perspective. And I think that's a really cool. I know for that in particular, I'm okay with this just being about taking up half of the page, because I don't think this needs to be more than anything it needs. I don't think it needs to be more anything else. But no, I really do definitely like these. I definitely do like the subclass changes, and I think that is a really good overall addition.